everybody. So I'm inspired to share. I recently got a question, what is my take on loneliness? So I thought I would examine it and share with you. The topic of loneliness has actually come to my mind, in addition to the question, a few times over the last couple of weeks. And for me, right now, being in Hawaii, being away from where I previously was, Los Angeles, there's certainly an experience of contrast, whereas in Los Angeles I was bombarded or constantly influenced by other bodies, or I had other bodies around me and I was seemingly engaged in a lot of activities that included a lot of people. And now I'm in a very rural area where I can't even see my neighbors, and the closest town is about 25 minutes away and it doesn't even have a stoplight. So there's not much of a population of people where I am. So of course the thoughts of loneliness have come up. And certainly even when I was in LA, I'm having thoughts come to mind right now about when I was in LA. I remember I spent a lot of time at home, and there were moments of or thoughts of loneliness that had come to mind, and a sense of longingness. And loneliness means to be without company. So when we're lonely, we are feeling like we're without company, and typically company symbolizes love. That's where we've come to know where love comes from, which is other people, or so we think. That's the way the mind's trained to think, the separate self-mind. And so we think or believe that being in the company of others, perhaps, we get love. And so when company or bodies aren't present, there's an assumption, or there's a perception that one is lacking or one is without. So when we feel lonely, we're feeling like we're lacking and we're without. And of course, the miracle says that the separation, which is really what we are feeling when we're lonely, we are feeling separate from love. When we're feeling like we're separate, it involves in some way a rendering of ourselves as lacking or imperfect. So we've rendered ourselves lacking or imperfect. But that is not the actuality of what we are. So when we're feeling lonely, we are seeing ourselves as we are not. We are seeing ourselves something different than what we've been created, or as we've been created. We, all of us, everything being created by God, which is synonymous with love, is whole. So if we are in fact whole, that means that we are whole with everything. So what does that mean? Well, I don't know exactly what that means, but what I'm feeling is that that is inclusive of life. That is life itself. So life isn't excluded from the whole. It couldn't be. Life is the whole. And so when we see ourselves as a separate self-concept, we are excluding ourselves from the whole. So loneliness is a perception of oneself separate from life itself. And so if we look at life and take our cues from life, life doesn't experience loneliness in any of its parts other than a human. Not that the human is a separate part, but in believing that these bodies are separate parts, we believe in loneliness. But if we look at nature, for example, I'm looking out at a tree. You know, if you see a tree in the middle of a pasture, you know, is the tree capable of being lonely? No, because it's got the company of life. It's an expression of life itself. It is, even if it's moving slow, it's moving with all things. The branches are moving with the wind. There's movement beneath the soil. The grass on top moves. There's chickens that walk over it that poop on the grass, and the poop goes down into the grass, gets absorbed by the roots. So there's always this flow and this movement, and there's no starting and stopping point from life. It doesn't stop and start with the tree. It extends. The leaves give off oxygen. And I'm not a scientist, but I'm sure there's so much more to what's unfolding and happening. The dead leaves fall, they decompose and go into the ground. So life is always is, and so life itself can never be lonely because it's always in flow, always in movement. Everything is always in flow and everything in movement, and that is what we are. If we are to be whole, we that is inclusive of what we are. I take my cues from the dog. I have a dog, Minnie, who she sleeps outside. She's my first outside dog. All my life I had dogs that lived inside, so she's the first outside dog. And the beauty of Minnie is, she's just always excited and curious, just like many dogs. And as I observe her, one of the beautiful things is she can be in her joy and her wonderment when she's with her pack. She's getting excited. But she also has moments where she's out looking over at the pasture and just watching life unfold, taking in the breeze, whatever it is. She's not recognizing or contemplating where she starts or stops. She's with life in its movement, and so she's not lonely as she's alone, seemingly alone, looking out at the pasture. So when we're feeling lonely, we are excluding life. We are seeing ourselves as a separate self from life. And so the experience of loneliness is really an attempt to push life out, keep life away. And it comes at the cost of life. And so there's a seeming experience of hurt and pain. But that is a misperception. And there's nothing wrong with that misperception. There's nothing wrong with the feelings of loneliness. It's usually our resistance to it that causes the seeming pain. But we know that the answer, because oftentimes when we're feeling lonely, we think the answer comes from other bodies. So if we're feeling lonely, we sometimes think, oh, well, if I had a lover or boyfriend or husband or wife, or if I was closer to my family, I wouldn't feel lonely. But that actually isn't true. I think we all have had experiences where we were in a crowded room or in the midst of a family gathering or even sharing a bed with someone, and we've still had the experience of loneliness. So loneliness isn't solved by bringing physical bodies into my proximity. Loneliness when seen for what it is brings the awareness of a definitionless sense of self that is part of life, that is life itself. And from that viewpoint, it is impossible to be lonely. We are never without the company of life. Even though the company of life may take the appearance of a camera in front of me right now, it may take the appearance of no bodies around me, it may take the appearance of a tree blowing in the wind, life itself in all of its movement, in all of its fireworks, is always with us, and it's only when we start to judge against it, judge against the seeming emptiness of bodies, or the absence of bodies. When we judge against that and we say there's something wrong with that, then it feels heavy. And when we tell the stories of ourselves being lonely, that feels heavy. When we tell the stories we conclude that because there aren't other bodies, somehow we're not worthy, or we're not loved. And that's all storytelling, and that's all an impossibility. And the healing is really a willingness to let go of that perception. Not that we have to do anything with that perception, but the willingness to be wrong about what we're seeing. If we insist that we're right in our experience of loneliness, if we insist that our conclusions and assumptions of feeling or being lonely because we are not in the proximity of other people, if we think we're right on that, then we will see that and have that experience. But if we're willing to say, well, maybe I could be wrong about this, maybe I'm just seeing this the wrong way, without a need to change or heal it, but rather a willingness just to allow something new and different to come through, that's really the prayer to come to know oneself, which is always free, always in the flow and the symphony of all things, and always trusting that everything is perfect, because it is. Because it is.